It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Hi, I'm Elise. This is Cold Takes. Welcome to Feminist Rom-Coms 101, Introduction to Pride and Prejudice. I'm gonna take you to school! As you may know if you've watched this channel at all, I love rom-coms. I love discussing them, I love watching them, I love having them as a part of our media discourse. And because of that, this isn't going to just be one video on Pride and Prejudice. This is going to be the beginning of a series. Welcome to Feminist Rom-Coms 101. Now, when I first conceived this series, I thought about calling it uplifting rom-coms or empowering rom-coms or the right kind of rom-coms, but since no lecture series is complete without a few rants and dissenting opinions, I thought we should just call it Feminist Rom-Coms 101. Because let's be clear, Feminist Rom-Coms 101 through, 68,000. I don't really know how college course numbering works. I did not pay attention in college, and I do not know how many videos I'm going to make in this series. It will not just be me singing the praises of rom-coms. I will not just be picking 10 rom-coms that I think are feminist out of a hat and discussing them with you and kind of defending them. I don't think that's very fun. But if we are going to move this genre that I care really deeply about into the future, and if it's going to come with us into the future cinema or whatever, we have to be honest and interrogate both the classics and the undiscovered gems of the genre. We're not here to say this is a bad rom-com and unfeminist and bad for gender progress or whatever. And we're not here to say, like, this is a shining example of a perfect rom-com and nothing terrible has ever come from it. But rather, we're here to discuss three things. What makes a rom-com feminist? What is the message of a feminist rom-com? And by distinction, what are the non-feminist rom-coms saying to the masses in general and to women in specific? And is there even such a thing as a feminist rom-com? Now, if you're like me, you probably already have your answers to these questions, or you're at least been thinking about them in general. But I really just do hope that you'll
accompany me on a journey with me through the wonderland in my mind.
Honestly, it's gonna be a wild ride, and I'll probably be drunk for most of it. I'm not drunk now, of course, but like by the time we get to comparing the original Arthur to the one from 2011 with Russell Brand, I will probably be too drunk to speak. So it'll be a good time, come on! Now, since this is a one-on-one and it is an introductory course, and introductory courses are boring as hell, I'm going to try and spice things up. That's right. Today's introduction is about the OG, the daddy of daddies of rom-coms, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is the original rom-com, the matriarch of the entire romance genre as we know it, and the legend that we stan in my house. And because of that, it's the perfect place to break down the key elements that we'll be seeing over and over again in the rom-coms that we'll be studying over the course of this series. And it's the perfect place to answer our first and most essential question going forward. What is a rom-com? Put very, very simply, the rom-com actually shares a definition with romance novels. It is a film wherein the main concern of the story is the romantic relationship between two people, with that film ending in a happily ever after for those two characters in the context of their relationship. Now, that last component, the HEA as it's called in romance, is the most important because it is the most often overlooked. My Best Friend's Wedding? Not a rom-com. 500 Days of Summer? Not a rom-com. Annie Hall, both gross and not a rom-com. Those films are romantic. Well, Annie Hall is not romantic, but the other films are romantic and they can be funny, but they are not rom-coms as the genre defines itself. Think of it this way. The Room is horrifying, but it is not a horror movie. Just because it has the components or the feels of a certain genre does not mean that it fits that genre's actual definition. Now that that's out of the way, let's look at our test case, Pride and Prejudice. I'm not going to explain to you the plot of Pride and Prejudice because you are a human on the planet Earth, and if you have not seen one of the Pride and Prejudice movies, then you have clearly seen a version of the story told. Pride and Prejudice is a rom-com because it takes a humorous look at the relationship between two characters, one that ends in a happy ending. But we'll get to that when we get there. What is important to note about these features of the rom-com that we're about to talk about, the ones that have derived from Pride and Prejudice, is not, and I repeat, not that they are good things. I am merely trying to describe and point out the legacy of Pride and Prejudice that we see in our modern films today. I want to have a framework of discussion that we can use once we move forward onto other rom-coms. Once we've discussed a few of these movies, Ever After, Penelope, Legally Blonde, 10 Things I Hate About You, The Proposal, for example, we're going to run into that same old argument that boring people always try to make to prove that they're only boring because they're smarter than you. But all rom-coms are the same. I'd like to avert that whining by acknowledging in the beginning that yes, there are features of the genre that are common. We have to contend with them. Features that are important to our overall discussion of the genre and its feminist street cred. Once we've acknowledged those features and where they come from, we can then move past it and just actually discuss what we're here to discuss. Beyond that, I think it's important to discuss these features not only to, keep the whiners at bay, but also to see what's shaped the genre. So by the end, we can not only say this movie is important and this movie is important and this movie has something to say about feminism, but we can talk about the genre as a whole. And what certain films do with those tropes is going to be different from others, which gives us a really rich discussion. Feature number 1. They're for women. This is the easiest, and it's actually weirdly the one that I forget the most often. Any scene in a film adaptation like that is purely the imagination of the film writers, and you'll actually notice in the Matthew McFadyen version that you actually don't ever hear them talking to each other. It's just through a window, which I think is actually really awesome, and I love that movie, and I love Pride and Prejudice, and I'm so glad we're talking about it. This is so exciting! Anyway, because these books came from such a distinctly female point of view, not only where the scene's told from kind of a feminine point of view and we're only concerned with the women in the story, they also were written by Jane Austen, who at the time was just called a lady. And as such, these books were marketed towards and gifted to and discussed as women's literature. Books for women. When was the last time that you saw a rom-com, modern or otherwise, marketed towards men? I can't think of one, and that's all due to the legacy of Pride and Prejudice. When we think of rom-coms as women's fare, a lot of that comes down to where she was coming from. Feature number 2, the power imbalance between the hero and the heroine. This is probably the biggest contribution Jane Austen in Pride and Prejudice has ever given to us outside of Colin Firth walking out of that pond. If you have ever seen a rom-com, you innately understand this concept. As a way of developing the conflict, a rom-com will generally have the hero and heroine occupy different statuses in life. In Pride and Prejudice, this is that Darcy earns £10,000 a year, while Lizzie Bennet is about to get kicked out of her house by her skis of a cousin. She needs money. He has it. That creates the opportunity for both of them to be pushed together, but it also is the opportunity for them to fall apart, because Darcy is protective of that money, and Lizzie, frankly, doesn't want that money or anything from him when the story starts. Rom-coms are a lot about status and wealth, and this is the point of the video where I say that if anyone knows Oliver North, the guy who does Philosophy Tube, please tell him to call me, because we need to have a discussion on his channel, on my channel, somewhere, about what it means that progressive liberal women love to read Regency romance. We all want to smash the patriarchy and destroy systems, and we want to tax the rich, and we want to eat the rich maybe, but we really, really love reading books about dukes who wear breeches so tight that you can see the outline of their £10,000 a year. Oliver North, call me. I'm really good at the discourse. Feature number 3, opportunities for advancement / love as a form of currency. The power imbalance in rom-coms is generally, as I'm sure you've already guessed, in favor of the man. This is a fragment of Pride and Prejudice coming back to haunt us, because like it or not, rom-coms are marketed towards women. There is an element of the aspirational to the romance for women. Elizabeth, by marrying Darcy, not only wins love, but she achieves financial security. She is the original woman who has it all. And that legacy of love as elevation lives on to this day. Think about something like The Proposal. Sandra Bullock's Martha Tate is literally above Ryan Reynolds. She is his boss. But he holds all the power not only in keeping her in America, but he has the family. He's the Alaskan Kennedy. He has the life that she always dreamed of having, but never really allowed herself to think she could. He has the power not only to keep her in America, but to give her the family she never had. That is a huge power imbalance, but one that actually kind of speaks to a lot of modern women. I feel lonely, I feel isolated. Maybe if I marry this man who has a wonderful family, I'll get that. This comes straight out of Pride and Prejudice. Lizzie needs the financial security and she wants it, but she also wants the romance. She also wants the love. And by having Darcy, she gets both. Feature number 4, the arc towards love. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A prickly asshole with a lot of money falls for the bookish, sassy woman with a few flaws but mostly a heart of gold. If you've heard of that plot, it's because of Pride and Prejudice. Darcy's arc in the story is one where he starts as a cold, calculating, distant man, but suddenly, with the bright woman, oozes into a heart of gold, and he becomes perfect and wonderful and romantic and does all these romantic gestures. You've seen that a million times. That's from Pride and Prejudice. Feature number 5 is white people, straight people, thin people, able-bodied people, cisgender people. Because of the popularity and staying power of Pride and Prejudice, the world has eventually gifted us with Georgette Heyer, who is really the mother of modern romance novels. Everything that Jane Austen did in canon of 12.5 books, Heyer solidified in 32 books, most of which are still in print and readily available today. In her time, Austen was writing for what she thought was her main audience. That is to say, women whose families were well off enough to give them an education, which is to say, usually, white women. And while Georgette Heyer was writing for a rapidly changing England during the early to mid-1900s, she also presumed her readers were well-off white women, or white women who could read enough to know that they wanted to be well-off. Because of this, romance, and rom-coms in particular, have a history of reaching for what I call relatability through presumed normalization. Basically meaning that the filmmakers will assume that the straight, white, skinny, able-bodied, cisgendered is the norm, and that everybody else, the LGBTQ community, people of color, fat people, disabled people, transgendered people, etc., will relate to it because that experience is the norm. Austen was writing about what she thought was the norm at the time, and that norm has been reflected through the ages. However, times have changed. Unfortunately, our films today still reflect Austen's world rather than the one we live in now. If Austen's world, as we come to refer to it, ever really existed, it embraces kind of a white supremacist British colonial idea of the world where the whites were at the top, they were the ones who got the happy endings, and the wealth, and the riches, and the power, and everyone else just didn't exist. And that's why something like Crazy Rich Asians, To All the Boys I Loved Before, or The Last Holiday are so subversive and exciting. They buck that trend. Feature number 6, politics. This one is a subset of above, but just in case you didn't hear it clearly, let me make something clear. All art is political. When you choose to make a film, you're making a political statement, even by something as small, and I do use air quotes around that word, small, as choosing who to cast. But more than just a matter of casting and who these films choose to frame, the stories themselves are inherently political. It's funny, actually, when people denigrate romance novels or rom-coms, they usually go one of two completely opposing ways. They either say, the movies are controlling the minds of the women's and they're giving them unrealistic expectations and they're damaging their little lady minds, or that they have too little power and they're saying nothing and they're just fluff and frippery that don't mean anything. This could not be further from the truth. As much as it is a rom-com, Pride and Prejudice is a satire. It's a satire of the positions in which British society put both men and women. Men were objects only worth whatever financial security they could offer a woman, and therefore could never be sure that the affection and attention they received was genuine, thus creating a kind of toxic masculinity in which they could neither afford to show or be seen showing affection. Women, on the other hand, were in a society in which they could only afford to offer affection and attention and love to men who could provide for and protect them by sheer virtue of their sex. Elizabeth and Darcy, along with Jane and Bingley, aren't meant to be ringing endorsements of the system, but a condemnation of it. Austen and the filmmakers who recreated her work remind the audience that they are exceptions to the rule, and even those exceptions were almost crushed out of existence by the system. Pride and Prejudice is political. Rom-coms are political because the personal is political. And once we get into the other rom-coms out there, those politics can get messy. But the politics are there, and they are worth discussing, and I look forward to digging into some of these movies later. Feature number 7, the breakup. This one isn't flashy, but again, we have to acknowledge it for all the rom-coms are the same people. Yes, rom-coms all have a breakup. Get over it. All of your stupid superhero movies have CGI robots But you don't hear me saying they're all the same. But they are all the same. They're all the same and they're all terrible. There, I said it. The only good superhero is Wonder Woman. Superheroes were a mistake. Feature number 8. The perception that love is a woman's only choice or means of escape. Have you ever heard someone say that rom-coms are damaging to women because they say that love is the only way to make you happy? Yep. It's a pretty uninteresting take, and as Lindsay Ellis and all the other YouTube daddies out there have said, thanks, I hate it. But that take, stupid though it may be, actually does have its roots here in Pride and Prejudice. You notice what you never hear Elizabeth say? I'm gonna be a career woman and strike out on my own, and I don't know, maybe write satirical novels with lots of heart and friendship and romance and books that will make me money and make me famous so I can buy my family a house and provide for them. How good was that British accent, guys? I've lived in England for 4 years. It's so good. Instead, her choices are marriage or destitution. At the beginning of the film, she believes that both of these options will make her unhappy, but by the end of the story, she realizes that it's marriage, not a life on her own, that will make her happy. This is a major feminist beef with the rom-com. We can't avoid it, and it's one that I think has gotten kind of twisted. Because the personal is political and we're all trapped in this capitalist hellscape, it's actually a really difficult knot to untangle. And one I think I'm going to attempt on my video about Ever After or How to Marry a Millionaire or Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. I haven't decided yet. But anyway, we aren't here to untangle it right now, just to note that the knot is there, and otherwise this video would be 28 hours long. Number 9, the Happily Ever After. And here it is, folks, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Happy Ever After. Pride and Prejudice Happy Ever After, not just for Lizzie and Darcy, but for Jane and Bingley, kind of turned the world on its head. The Happy Ever After didn't used to be a requirement, but now, because of Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen's smash successes with her other books, the Happy Ever After from Pride and Prejudice is an artifact, and unless you want rom-com fans to come after you with torches and pitchforks, don't make a rom-com without one. Now, that said, what constitutes a Happy Ever After is evolving. What does it mean? Does it mean marriage? Does it mean children? Does it mean engagement? Conventional wisdom says that they at least have to still be together by the end of the story, but we'll examine that wisdom as we look at some more films later in the series. So, when we continue to feminist rom-coms 101, 102, 103, and onward into infinity, these 9 elements are the main ones that we'll be examining. Every movie will have its own challenges and interesting points of discussion, of course. In 10 Things I Hate About You, we'll discuss purity culture and the legacy of Shakespeare. In our Down with Love episode, we'll talk about the ways in which sex is allowed to complicate female characters in the eyes of the viewer. In How to Marry a Millionaire, we'll discuss male anxieties about social and literal economies and how that affects their approach towards love and romance. But for the most part, we'll be taking a look at film through the lens of the genre's main tropes, habits, and narrative tics to see what the genre as a whole has to say about people, the roles those people play in society, and how romance fits into the experience of life. Now, I know what you all came here for. Probably. Maybe. Actually, I basically don't know any of you, so I don't know what you came here for. But if I had to hazard a guess, it would be because you want me to decide, is Pride and Prejudice a feminist rom-com? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to answer that question. At least not yet. The legacy of Pride and Prejudice is written into every single rom-com that has ever been produced. So until I've explored and discussed and dissected some of those, I'm not going to answer that question. But I would like to hear your answer. Do you think Pride and Prejudice is a feminist rom-com? Why or why not? You can use the BBC series, the other series, movies out there, or the Matthew McFadden one, or we could just talk about the book generally. But in the meantime, I'd love it if you would answer a question for me below. What rom-coms do you want me to put under the feminist microscope? What movies should we test and examine and question first? What movies might surprise us? What movies might fail us? What movies might we fall in love with all over again? I can't wait to hear your answers, whatever they may be. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Go tell someone you love them. Hey everybody, it's the credits now. This is where the credits happen, and I'll give shout outs to my patrons and such. Elise here. I have some cool news. The Christmas Company, that book that I wrote, is gonna be a movie. It's becoming a Hallmark movie. How cool is that? You can, there'll be a link to like the press release down below, because I'm real jazzed about it. How cool is that? People get to go visit my little small Texas town and watch some people fall in love. How cool. Anyway, thank you so much for supporting this video, for watching it, for leaving your comments down below. If you like this, the idea of the series, or if you like the other stuff on my channel, I would love it if you went over to my Patreon page. For just $1, you can get exclusive access to all kinds of exclusive videos that I've done just for the patrons. I'm going to do a new one every month, and you can tell me what you wanted me to talk about, which is really cool. Suggest topics and I'll just ramble. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, all of those good things. Please comment below and let me know what rom-coms I should chat about. Thanks so much for watching. I can't wait to see you guys next time on Cold Takes. Bye!